A sitting member of Congress just got charged for doing her job, not for corruption, not for violence, not for breaking any law, but for performing one of the most fundamental duties the Constitution allows: oversight. That's the moment everything cracked open. Because if lawmakers can be prosecuted for asking questions, for inspecting what taxpayers fund, then who's really running the system? What happened next exposed something far darker than politics. It revealed how the machinery of justice itself is being weaponized against those who dare to look too closely. Representative McIver wasn't sneaking into a facility. She wasn't staging a protest.
Wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and/or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President. A plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the west front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process, because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault, is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th. as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6th insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work, the First Amendment and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to.
She was executing the precise statutory right every member of Congress has to visit an ICE detention center, observe conditions, and report back to the people. The Supreme Court has ruled over and over again that oversight isn't a privilege, it's an obligation. But when the Department of Justice turned around and charged her with assault, it sent shockwaves through Washington, because that move didn't just bend the rules, it shattered the separation of powers. And it left one question echoing across Capitol Hill: if oversight can be criminalized, what's next? Corruption, incompetence, and backroom loyalty have crept so deep into the system that even constitutional duties are being painted as crimes. This isn't a partisan issue, it's a crisis of accountability. And when Congressman Jamie Raskin took the mic, he didn't hold back. He tore straight through the excuses, exposing the double standards, the hypocrisy, and the quiet fear gripping the people who once promised to defend the rule of law. His words didn't just sting, they hit like a hammer. Because beneath all the noise, something larger was at stake: the survival of truth inside a justice system that's been turned upside down. This week revealed just how far things have fallen. One rogue official inside the Department of Justice unilaterally canceled over $500 million in grants, money meant for local law enforcement, for victims' rights organizations, and for shelters helping survivors of assault. No hearing, no debate, no oversight. Just a signature, and hundreds of programs vanished overnight. When Raskin and his colleagues tried to restore that funding, every argument they made was met with silence. Not one word of objection, just a quiet vote against. The message was clear: ideology mattered more than justice. Politics mattered more than people. And that's when Raskin's tone changed. Because this wasn't just about funding, it was about what kind of nation we've become. As he laid out the facts, one story stood above the rest. A 33-year-old rioter who once attacked officers at the Capitol, who smashed through the glass door that led to chaos and tragedy, had been pardoned, and just got arrested again. This time not for politics, but for burglarizing homes. The same man once described by a federal judge as the loudest and most violent of that mob is now back behind bars. And who had given him that second chance? The very leadership that claims to stand for law and order. While the people who risked their lives defending democracy were left with scars and silence, the ones who tried to tear it apart were being rewarded. The Department of Justice even agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of the woman who died trying to force her way through the Speaker's lobby during that same attack. Originally, the DOJ had dismissed the lawsuit as meritless, and a Capitol Police investigation had cleared the officer involved, calling his actions heroic, even life-saving. Yet now, years later, that same department reversed course, offering a massive payout with taxpayer money. No explanation. No consistency. Just a complete inversion of justice. Meanwhile, not a single cent has been offered to the more than 140 police officers who were beaten, hospitalized, or permanently injured that day. Not a dime for their families. And Speaker Mike Johnson, still refusing to hang the simple plaque honoring those officers, something Congress already voted into law 2 years ago. The plaque was supposed to stand as a symbol of gratitude and unity. Instead, it's become a symbol of cowardice. Because in this version of justice, heroes are ignored while lawbreakers are glorified. And every time someone stays silent, that message grows louder. Raskin saw it for what it was, a betrayal. Not just of the officers who defended the Capitol, but of every citizen who believes the law should mean something. He warned that what's happening now isn't oversight, it's sabotage. The goal isn't justice, it's control, and it's spreading fast. Because when a single partisan prosecutor in New Jersey decided to indict Representative Mac McIver for assaulting officers during her lawful visit to a detention facility, the mask finally slipped. What she did wasn't violent. There were no injuries, no officers harmed, no chaos, no resistance. Just a lawmaker walking into a building she had every right to inspect. But the charges came anyway. Why? Because the facility she visited wasn't just any facility, it was Delaney Hall, run by a private prison company that's been a generous donor to political campaigns. $1 million funneled into the same movement now trying to silence oversight. The optics weren't just bad, they were revealing. Here was a congresswoman holding a corporation accountable for alleged mistreatment of detainees, and within weeks, she's charged with a crime. Raskin called it exactly what it was, a constitutional outrage and a direct assault on Article 1 powers, the kind of move that chills every other lawmaker who might think twice before inspecting what the government doesn't want exposed. The absurdity didn't stop there. While McIver was being dragged through headlines for performing her duty, the Department of Justice was simultaneously firing over a dozen senior prosecutors, men and women whose only crime was working on cases tied to the January 6th investigation. Careers ended, records erased, experience tossed aside to make room for loyalty. And as Raskin pointed out, the same people who once called the insurrectionists criminals are now calling oversight treason. That's not irony. That's a warning, because if they can twist words like that, they can twist laws too. When Representative Buddy Carter called his own colleagues rioters for visiting an ICE facility, it was more than name-calling, it was narrative control. When another member said it was worse than 9/11, it wasn't hyperbole, it was conditioning. The story was being flipped on its head, violent mobs rebranded as heroes, and constitutional duty branded as crime. No one at that facility was hurt. No one hospitalized, no broken bones, no damaged property, yet the Justice Department claims it was an assault. Meanwhile, those who actually assaulted police officers walk free, or worse, get rewarded. That's the pattern Raskin laid bare. The selective outrage, the double standard, the rewriting of history in real time. In this upside-down world, loyalty to a movement matters more than loyalty to the truth, and the people running it know exactly what they're doing. Because the more they can blur the line between law and politics, the easier it becomes to punish dissent. Today it's a member of Congress facing false charges. Tomorrow it's anyone who questions authority. Raskin's words cut through that illusion. He looked across the room and asked the question that hung like thunder. If ICE truly believed there was an assault, why weren't they there to testify? Why wasn't the supposed victim even present? The silence that followed said everything. The star of the show, he said, is absent, and that, he concluded, is no oversight. It was a moment that stripped the whole performance bare. The cameras, the headlines, the talking points, all revealed for what they were: distraction. But he didn't stop there. Raskin turned back to the bigger picture. To the officers still waiting for recognition, to the plaque still missing from the Capitol wall, to the justice system that once promised fairness, but now rewards only loyalty. 3 years have passed since that day, and still, nothing. Not a single sign of honor for those who defended the government itself. We voted for it, he reminded them. It became law, and yet the Speaker refuses to enforce it. The words hung heavy, not just as criticism, but as proof. Proof that the decay wasn't just ideological, it was institutional. By the time he finished, the room was quiet, because beneath his calm delivery was a fury every viewer could feel. He wasn't just talking about one indictment or one facility, he was describing a system in collapse, a system where oversight is criminalized, corruption is protected, and justice is used as a weapon. And the worst part, too many people have gotten comfortable with it. He drew a sharp contrast that left no room for spin. A hostage, he said, is someone taken illegally by a terrorist group. A political prisoner is someone jailed for their beliefs. But those who violently attacked police, who destroyed property, who tried to overturn democracy, those are not patriots. And yet they're being treated like victims while real victims are erased. It was a reality check, brutal and unfiltered. Because this isn't about left versus right, it's about right versus wrong, about whether the law still belongs to the people, or only to those who can twist it for power. And while the nation's attention was on sensational headlines, the deeper story was unfolding quietly. Health programs stripped from millions, funding cut for education, nutrition, and aid to the most vulnerable, all while the Department of Justice turns its energy toward prosecuting Oversight. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was diversion. And Raskin called it out for exactly what it was, an attempt to distract the public from policies that hurt real Americans. This, he said, is how corruption hides behind chaos. That's what makes this moment so dangerous. It's not just about one politician or one party, it's about the precedent. Because if a member of Congress can be charged for doing her job, if prosecutors can be fired for pursuing the wrong cases, and if the law can be bent to reward loyalty and punish truth, then no one is safe from the same fate. It's the kind of erosion that happens quietly, then all at once. And yet amid all of that, one voice refused to bow. Raskin's closing words weren't dramatic, they were defiant. He reminded everyone watching that defending Oversight isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. That the Constitution doesn't bend for power, it binds it. And that those who still believe in real justice must speak louder than ever before. Because silence is the accomplice of decay. He didn't tiptoe around the truth, he drove straight through it, because the real danger isn't chaos, it's complacency. The willingness to shrug and move on. The willingness to let power redefine reality. But every time someone like Raskin stands up, it chips away at that illusion. It reminds the public that this fight isn't over. That truth still has defenders, even when the odds seem impossible. The irony, of course, is that while the loudest voices keep crying that the government is being weaponized against them, they're the ones wielding it like a blade. They're using the Department of Justice as a personal tool to intimidate, silence, and rewrite. And through all of it, their base stays quiet, either convinced it's justified, or too afraid to admit what's really happening. That silence is complicity, and Raskin's fury made that impossible to ignore. There's a reason his words went viral. It wasn't just passion, it was precision. Every example, every statistic, every jab hit at the core hypocrisy defining this moment in history. He exposed how power shields itself by pretending to be persecuted, how corruption dresses itself in patriotism, how the people who scream the loudest about freedom are the ones most desperate to control it, and in the end, he issued a challenge, not just to Congress, but to the country. To stay awake, to stay loud, to remember that democracy doesn't protect itself, that it depends on people willing to call out the lies, even when the liars are louder, because the rot doesn't disappear on its own, it's forced out by truth. So as the cameras fade and headlines move on, remember this: oversight isn't a crime. Justice isn't a weapon, and power, no matter how loud or vengeful, never gets the final word when the people refuse to be silenced. Representative Mac McIver's indictment may have been meant to intimidate, but it ended up exposing everything those in power wanted hidden. If you've made it this far, you already know what's at stake. The system only changes when people refuse to look away. So if you believe in exposing corruption wherever it hides, if you believe in holding power accountable, no matter who holds it, take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people see what they're not supposed to. And if you're new here, subscribe and join the growing community that refuses to stay quiet, because silence is how this story wins, and we're not staying silent anymore. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and stay loud.